Hey, everybody. I have a treat for you. But first, I want to share a quick update because a lot of you have been supporting me through the launch of my new book, which is called, funny enough, Launch Your Book, An Entrepreneur's Guide to Reviews that Drive Revenue. And I jokingly said like a month ago, it would be kind of embarrassing if this book doesn't get a lot of reviews. Well, thanks to my amazing launch team, we're now at 165 written reviews and 168 global ratings. I know there are like 200 launch team members that are planning to do it at some point. I want you to know it's not too late, even if you can't get to it this week. Ideally, I'm trying to get all the reviews up as many as possible by July 8th, my launch day. But I'm actually aiming for 1,000 reviews in the next 6 months. So, quite literally, it's not going to be too late if you can get to it. I just want to say thank you. The early feedback and the ongoing feedback has been amazing. And I can't wait to push this out really wide because I know it's a resource that a lot of authors are going to really benefit from. And speaking of those kinds of resources, I'm going to share one of my favorite resources, someone who has helped keep me sane for nearly a decade. And without any further delay, let me introduce you to this week's guest. Today's guest has been behind the scenes supporting the success of this podcast and my original show, On the Schmooze. In July 2015, I started researching how to launch a podcast. That fall, I began recording interviews, but it wasn't until I hired an editor the following summer that I felt ready to release those episodes. On July 19th, 2016, my first podcast, On the Schmooze, officially launched, and it ran for 8.5 years. That same editor has been with me ever since, now supporting my Biz Book Pub Hub twice a week podcast. He's a seasoned podcast producer, strategist, and founder of Podcast Guy Media. Since 2015, he has helped launch, shape, and grow dozens of shows, producing well over 3,000 episodes. His specialty, helping authors, business owners, and thought leaders create high-quality, lead-generating podcasts without the overwhelm. From content planning and guest booking to editing, show notes, scheduling, promotion, he handles it all. He's also one of our Biz Book Pub Hub partners, supporting nonfiction authors in transforming their books into binge-worthy podcasts and compelling audiobooks. He brings a rare mix of technical expertise, marketing savvy, and genuine care that helps every client's message shine. Please join me in welcoming Joshua Rivers. Joshua, I feel like it's long overdue to welcome you to my show. Welcome. I'm so glad to have you here.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited to be part of this show, and I've been looking forward to it for a long time now, actually.
Yeah, that's great. You know, reflecting back on that early time period, I mean, I had almost no money. I had a business that was only a year off the ground. I was trying to go from a day job into entrepreneurship. Got bit by the podcast bug. Started to record my own shows. Dabbled once in editing my own episode just to kind of see how it was, and spent an inordinate amount of time trying to get the music to just fade naturally. I was like, this is something that someone else can do with the flick of their wrist. And I just couldn't figure out how to move forward until I found somebody, which ultimately was you, that gave me the expertise that you had and the confidence boost that I needed to actually move forward and finally release these episodes. Some of which I had recorded like the September and October before that summer that I finally was getting them
Mhm.
released. So I'm just so grateful we got connected way back when, and you've witnessed this whole evolution. I'm just sort of curious about your take, since most shows like don't make it past I don't remember if it's 12 episodes, 6 months, something like that. So I'm just curious where you thought this was going to go when I was like, I think I'm going to do this thing. What do you think of this
Yeah,
show?
I think the magic number is seven episodes. Is like the ongoing thing that I've heard over years and years, and I think it still kind of stands true. There's a lot of people, they test the waters, they get in there, whatever, 3-4 episodes, and they experience exactly what you experience, and they're like, this is taking way more time than I thought it would. Because again, they're trying to do it all themselves because trying to save money, whether they're just someone do it as a hobby or someone trying to do it as a business entrepreneur, and they're trying to save money. And so they're like, I can do this myself because I have 27 other hats anyway. Why not add this one? So they get to that point and they're like, I don't know what to do. So for me, it's always encouraging when someone like you've tried it. You're like, hey, I got the ideas and the basics, but I know I'm not going to do this long term myself. And so that's always a good sign when someone realizes their need for that and turns to get some help. That makes it more promising that you've already done some of the background work. I remember that first conversation we had. I was at our public library with my kids, and I had to uh, not rent, but whatever, book time in the little study room, glass enclosed thing. And so I'm like in the middle of the library by myself in this room, and people watching me. And so we just had our conversation. I remember over an hour, maybe 2 hours. I can't remember, going through all the different details and everything about what you're looking for. And you're like, hey, so go ahead and check out this one that I did. It's on SoundCloud, and check and do all this. And so anyway, yeah,
Yeah. Oh, I
I like your
remember
memories.
now.
And so,
I did. I
yeah.
uploaded that one to SoundCloud as a test, just to. I mean, literally, I'm techie enough, but I also think that there's that piece where, and this is true for all prospects, for all of us. If the prospects actually understand the bigger problem, then they're looking for the bigger solution. So I had gotten enough into the weeds with the tech piece to recognize the bigger problem.
Yeah.
And then I was like, well, now I just need to find someone that can help me guide through. And because I was really scrappy budget wise, I actually didn't take on you doing all the things you could do, like producing. And I mean, I sometimes go to these shows and there's a producer sitting there with the host on the air, and I'm like, that's got to be
Mhm.
expensive, just sitting there, like, making things happen. But if you're really nervous about the tech, that makes a lot of sense. But I had to get good with that part at least, booking my own guests, and doing my own show notes for a year, and then eventually training VAs to do it. And I've been really fortunate. Pay Robbins has been with me now for over 5 years, and we've got this down to a science, which is why we said yes to twice a week show last fall,
Mhm.
which is incredible. As of September of 24, we started going to 2 episodes a week, which I did not plan to do. I did not expect that. One thing I did do, though,
Yeah.
Joshua, is that my very first episode was 000, and then I had 001, 002, and 003. Those were the 4 episodes that we released initially in a batch, following the best practice of releasing multiple episodes in order to get people to actually subscribe to your podcast. But the 3 digits, that was really important to me. It was a placeholder that would lead to 100 episodes. So in my
Mhm.
brain, I was counting to 50 episodes a year. I'm going to get to 100 episodes. And I almost let go of the show after 100 episodes and tried. And I had a whole another idea for another podcast. And a coach
Mhm.
kind of talked me out of it. And then I ran the show for a total of 8.5 years before Biz Book Pub Hub became the obvious successor.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely a good sign too, because there's sometimes when I see people and their first episode is just one. And so to me, that's like okay, your anticipation is just single digits. And yeah.
But they don't
So
even
I
realize they're doing that to themselves. Like, no wonder
probably
7 is
not.
the number.
Yeah. So one of those subconscious things that is just kind of like what I don't know. You
Yeah,
just
you gotta set
don't
an
know.
intention. Well,
Yeah.
I didn't expect to get immediate results. In fact, the show on the Schmooze was really, sort of adjacent to my business for a long time. It was a great networking tool. It led to hour-long conversations with really amazing people, gave me a chance to uplift a lot of people that I thought deserved a little more, spotlight, gave me content to share when you first start a business, like, you feel like your job is creating content, so it gave me some good content early on to share. But it wasn't like it directly led to me being booked to speak, but it was part of the overall package of my
Hmm.
credibility, particularly when I kept going, when I went past that 2 year mark. Because then people are like, wait, you have 145 episodes? And I'm like, yeah. It's sort of like, if you don't quit, you're just going to keep getting episodes. Like, you just put it in place. And I want to say a very public thank you. I've said this so many times, Joshua. I don't know how many times you've heard it, but this show has been possible because of you, and then eventually you and your team keeping it going. I can't even count the number of times you jumped through a hoop. Like, I remember one time I left town. I'm on vacation I'm like away from my desk, and you're like, the file's not where it's supposed to be on Drive. And I'm like, I'm not going to be back till Sunday night, and it's being uploaded Monday night. And you're like, that's fine. Just let me know when you get back. And I like scrambled to get it to you, and you made it sound good. You just turned it around, made it work. So I count that. There are more times that happened than you ever slipped. Like I can't even think of a time where you were at fault. It was more like we were running behind on something and we're trying to get ahead. We're always trying to batch and always trying to get ahead. We have a good system now,
Yeah.
but I think this is like maybe the 5th time you and I have had a conversation in 9+ years. Like I can't even think of it, like all emails, which is remarkable to have that longevity.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a really good relationship. That just goes to show. I mean, a lot of it's set up on your side as far as that, but I mean, yeah, things just work so well. There's been a couple texts here and there where it's like, hey, just bringing this up to your attention. It's like, yeah, we did the email, but hey, here's a text. Just be able to do that. But yeah, so I guess I'm doing my job as an editor if you're not noticing the mistakes. So that's good. So
Yeah, I mean, and we've changed formats a little bit, and then we started doing lives. That's a few years ago. That was a big change because there was some extraneous stuff that like the intro piece that I always say hello. I'm like, when you switch editors, I'm like, we don't really want to include that part. But it's these minor things, and honestly, it's such a time saver knowing that it's going to get handled. Sometimes someone's audio is not great, and you have to work harder to make it sound right. I know a handful of times the wrong microphone. Like I have this fancy mic, and then you switch on StreamYard and it doesn't switch on this fancy mic. And then you're like,
yeah,
listen later, and you're like, oh my God, that is so bad. That is why I own a fancy mic.
yeah.
Like it's so bad.
I don't want that internal mic.
Yeah, it's particularly I'm literally in a room covered in like wood paneled walls and floors and a whole wall of windows. Like this is not a nice little sound booth. So I need this
Yeah.
fancy mic. I wanted to get a better sense of how you got into the business of supporting podcast hosts. I understand that it was back in like 2015. It was about a year before you and I met. So yeah, what sort of started your passion down this path?
Yeah, so it started. So I first got into podcasting 2012. Somewhere at the end of 2011 is when I first heard about what a podcast was. Started listening to some, and eventually started my own at the beginning of 2013. I used 2012 kind of planning some of the things because I'm like, I had a blog and I'm like, I can just turn this blog into a podcast. And so to me, it just kind of seemed natural. And so I was just doing some various things. And then so then I started like doing a couple interviews here and there to try to promote my business. At the time, I was trying to get into web design, and so I was doing some interviews to try to promote my web design services. And one of them was on the show with Tom Warkus, In the Trenches, way back in the day. And I think he was actually the one that introduced us.
He is.
But
Thank you, Tom.
but anyway, so he interviewed me. I'm like, great. And he says, yeah, I'll just let you know when it's ready to publish all that. I'm like, all right, great. And it'd been like 2 months, heard nothing. And so I emailed him back, and I'm like, hey, just checking in. I hadn't heard that it published yet. So just kind of seeing where things are at. He's like, man, I have been so busy. I have not been able to edit the episodes. I'm like 30 episodes behind and all that. And so I'm like, I do my own podcast. I understand how to do the editing and putting stuff together. Hey, maybe I can help. My thought was not, oh, I want to get into podcast editing. My thought was, I want to get my episode aired so I can get web design clients. And so I'm like, here, let me go ahead and help you. He's like, oh, okay. I had no idea how to structure the pricing or anything like that. So I was like super cheap, even for back in the day. And so we started going through some of those things, and I can't remember where it went from there, but I got another client after that accidentally. And then it started to get a couple more. And so by that time, that's when you and I got introduced. And so that's kind of how it got started. And I'm like, I'm getting a lot more clients doing podcast editing than I am doing with any of the web design stuff. So I'm like, I'm going to put that to the side, not worry about the web design. I'm going to focus on the podcast editing. And so that's kind of where that kind of grew. And in the process, I started working with different different people trying to do shows. Most of them were entrepreneur type people, business areas, and so they would be trying to do some different things. And somewhere along the way, there was like, hey, I want to write a book, and you were one of them. You're like, hey, I'm going to write this book. And so then like some of the things you were doing in your show supported what you were doing in the book and vice versa. So I was seeing kind of the connection there to be able to kind of amplify the message that you were trying to get in your book on the podcast. And then also then that kind of rolled into like, well, there's a big tie with audiobooks as well. And so I remember that we went through that process of turning that first book you did into an audiobook. You recorded it, sent it to me, and I would try to put it all together and figure out, okay, what is Audible trying to look for with all the details behind the spec kind of details. And so working on that. And so it just kind of started from there. And it's like, okay, well, this is the kind of thing I want to try to be able to work with, because someone that's an author has a message that they want to get out. And as you and probably anyone that has written a book is, by the time you go through the process of writing the book, there's already some things that it's like, I wish I could include that, or this kind of updated there. And then especially you get through the whole editing process and then you finally publish, and it's like, okay, there's already things that like the book is half out of date, maybe not quite, but there's already things that are there. A podcast is a great way to be able to take what you wrote and be able to continue that conversation and be able to say, hey, I wrote this in my book. Hey, there's additional things that I learned. I worked with this person. I worked with that person. Here's some updated information. And it's a great way. I love being able to work with podcasters to be able to help bring out those things.
I remember those early days. For those who are like checking Audible for my books, you're not going to find them there. What I actually did for my first book, Croissants versus Bagels, Strategic, Effective, and Inclusive Networking at Conferences, is I offered the audiobook files as the bonus download for the paperback. So even on the cover of the paperback, it says something about a free bonus audiobook. And when you get into the book, you see a little link, and then you get access to a password protected page on my website that has all the files. And so I had the fancy mic and I recorded it. At the time, I didn't really have other bonus content that now I'm floating in it. Like I have so much bonus content, but I was trying to entice people to join my email list, and this was sort of a good way to do it. And there are still people today that are opting in to get access to those files. And these days, you could just download all the audio files to a mobile device and just listen to them wherever you'd like. But it has changed so much since 2017, just even trying to figure that out. But yeah, even that, like I remember looking at ACX, the Audible rules, and trying to understand what I had to do, and asking for your help because you had the audio experience. And, it's still daunting, honestly, for a lot of people who are thinking about going through the process of recording something, wanting it to be professional. And I'm like, well, at the very least, I know I have this editor who can handle the audio files and help me bring them to life. And I did do, as you mentioned, as soon as I got the idea that I was going to do this book, there was particularly one question that I asked every person for at least 50 episodes, and was able to use some of those stories, some of the answers that they shared in the book as sort of context or scenarios or examples, to bring that to life. And then a lot of those people also that I interviewed in that year became endorsers for the book. So I needed, I think I asked 10 or 12 people to endorse the book. And they were happy to do so because we had this relationship that we developed over the course of the time that I had known them. Initially, podcasting was the way we connected. So, like I said, great networking tool for me back in the day when I was trying to sort of raise my visibility, and just connect with the right kinds of people that I thought would appreciate my message and amplify it out. So, highly recommend the podcasting. But I also know that podcasting is a really big endeavor. I often find myself talking people actually out of it. When they first come to me, I'm like, tell me why you want to do this. Well, I want, one of this or that. I'm like, so what's most important in the next 6 months for your business? And they're like, making money. I'm like, ooh, podcast is a good way to spend money. It's not like an immediate money maker.
Definitely
so
not.
I talk them into podcast guesting. So how do you help people think through the strategy of like, is now the right time for this business owner, this entrepreneur or thought leader, to create a podcast for themselves versus maybe, being on other people's shows? Like what are some questions you can help them think through to get to the answer?
Now, honestly, most of the time that people come to me, they've already gone through that process for the most part, but I do try to do that because podcasting is not for everyone. Uh Not everybody has the face for podcasting. And so, or the voice. And so, or just their way of being able to communicate is not in spoken word. And so they can do great writing, but verbally they don't do as well. And so for that case, okay, maybe podcasting is not the best, at least not having your own podcast where you're the host. But like you said, there is podcast guesting, which is a great way to be able to do that. And so a lot of it has to do with what is like you asked the question is, okay, what is your goal? What are you trying to achieve by doing this? And so when you're the podcast host, you are trying to elevate your message and yourself and be able to promote that and all the ideas that you're trying to do. And so you're trying to you're creating, it's like creating a physical store, and it's like everyone has to come to your store to get your stuff. And so you got to do all the marketing, get people to come to you. And so all this work to be able to do that. Podcast guesting is more like, hey, I have this product. Let me go put it in Walmart and in Target and Kohl's and JC Penney and whatever, all the different places, and put it there so that they can help promote those things. And as the brand starts to get popular, then it kind of helps build the business overall. And so that's kind of the way that I think about it when it comes to, okay, should I host, should I guest? And there could be a good strategy to do both as well. And so, I mean, there's a lot of stores. I mean, there's like whatever Van Heusen and whatever, they have their brand, they have their own store, but they also have their brand in other stores as well. And so it just kind of completes the whole thing. But when it comes to podcasting, you had to think about your resources as far as time and money. How is that actually going to work for you? And a lot of it probably is more the time than the money, but there's a little bit of both. And so, because as a host, you're going to be spending a lot more time than you think you will, even if you have help doing the technical and things like that. It's not usually as easy as you just show up, you talk, and then you're done. It's not just an hour that you do that. There's some hosts that they do that. They have things structured to where they can be able to do that. But those are people that it's like they've been experts in their industry for 30 plus years. And usually it's like somebody else kind of co-hosting with them, kind of setting things up. One example that I can think of, this maybe starting to go into a tangent, but we have I just lost his name. So maybe we just need to scratch this then.
Sure. Well, let me just jump in here actually and say that the first year that I was recording the podcasts, and by the time I started releasing the episodes, a lot of time had passed. And so I had to re-listen to every episode. And I wasn't as confident initially as a host. And so I saved my like 2 cents, my like expertise that I wanted to add, and did it in the post. So I recorded an episode, interviewed someone, and then I would listen to the whole thing, like jot down some notes, and then I would record sort of my 3 takeaways from the conversation as part of the wrap up. Took a lot of time. It took a lot of time to do all this, not the interview, but like everything that came after. And I knew that it wasn't sustainable. So I was going to be working on a new book, and I managed to get a virtual assistant, my very first. And I want to do a shout out to Melissa Smith, who helped me figure out how to find a VA. And at the time, it was a VA that was apprenticing with me. Again, I don't know if you remember that I didn't have a lot of money. And so I told her that we spent the summer working together. I would teach her everything I knew about, managing a podcast so she could then get clients doing that. And we would learn together how to do a book launch. And then she could get clients doing that. And I would just like train her on all the technical pieces that I had already learned for myself. And in retrospect, it worked because it helped me start to document my process. So after she left and I hired someone new, it wasn't as hard for someone new to take on that role. And then eventually a new person. And I'm really, again, fortunate Pei has been with me such a long time. But yeah, just like figuring out how to trim my time was a big reason I was able to sustain this for so long. So I use not Calendly. I actually use something called Schedule Once, but it's essentially that
Mhm.
same kind of concept. And my booking form, I collect everything I need from the guest, including their image, their agreement to whatever legalese I have in there, all their links, a mailing address, because I sometimes send people like birthday cards or congratulations cards, etc. Like everything I might possibly need. And we've also simplified even the process of getting the intro written, which I could talk about next. But my job is to book the guest, send them the link to they get in, they get confirmed on my calendar automatically. And then our way of taking the intro done is basically all the research I do. Because one of my pet peeves, I will say, Joshua, and I'm sure you've seen this, there are hosts that are so well researched on their guests that they're saying things like, so in your third book, in the fourth chapter, there's a footnote. And you're like, wait, what? I didn't know he wrote three. Was it three books? Four? Anyway, like the audience is kind of lost, and I always want to remain curious, and I try to ask the question that my audience would be curious about. And I want to be judged in my last three attempts, not my first three attempts, because we always should get better. My
Mhm.
first three attempts, I always tell people, if you think I'm good at being a podcast interviewer, and you got to go back. Like it's a learning curve, but you only learn by doing it. And
Mhm.
I'm sure you've seen that with the clients you've worked with, their confidence and their smoothness. And like, even if it's something you're not sure about, you can get better at it just by doing it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it takes practice. So yeah, doing those first couple, and probably one advantage you had of like starting and then restarting is you were able to learn from those first ones. So then like the first official start was a little bit better than maybe the normal official first start.
Oh,
And so
there was only one episode that I scrapped. I did a
okay,
trial with one friend, but then everything else I recorded,
that's what
I
it was.
kept.
Okay.
Yeah. But I
Okay.
did do for a whole year, every other episode was 8 to 10 minutes of just me talking. And
Right.
so I only had to book 25, I think it was 25 guests that first year, basically every other week. So that
Yeah, I
was
remember that
partly,
now.
again, the strategy was to break past that 7 episodes, right? I was like, well, if half the episodes for this year are me, and I have all these blog posts already that I could basically recite, and that also forced me to write more blog posts, which also became part of the new book. Like all these like blog posts really was about
Mhm.
me writing the book. And that became bonus content actually for my Kindle version of my first book. I gave away, I think it was 25 individually formatted PDFs of these blog posts. Each had an embedded link to the podcast episode where I had recorded it. So it was like a
Mhm.
multimedia bonus content. But yeah, you you got to start somewhere. I was so nervous. I mean, this is sort of silly now to think about because I'm now like live streaming an interview. I wouldn't turn the camera on for my first, I would say like 6 or 7 interviews. There were people I knew locally at the time I was living in Boston. They were local leaders that I kind of knew. And the reason I wouldn't put the camera on, we started with hello, hey, how are you? And then I told them we should turn our cameras off to save bandwidth. Meanwhile, I was plugged in to an Ethernet because I'm on a college campus when I was recording. My wife worked at a college
Mhm.
campus, so I had really good internet. The reason I had to turn off the camera was that I was like this, face down, looking at my questions. I had a list of questions on a piece of paper that I was trying not to rattle so that the sound would come on the microphone. I mean, it was just
Uh
like it was a daunting thing to get comfortable enough. I also could never get in the habit of like jotting down a note, so I have to just remember what question I wanted to ask next. And sometimes you have 4 questions you want to ask next.
mhm.
Oh, there's so much. There's like a lot to balance in the moment.
There is. Yeah, and that definitely takes a lot of practice to be able to kind of get used to how you can be able to do that balance between like active listening and try to plan, okay, where do I want to take this podcast? And I guess that's part of it too. It's like balancing where do I want to take the podcast and where is this conversation going, and kind of weaving those two together. But you mentioned earlier,
Mhm.
just a minute ago, about when you were first starting that you were doing an interview one week and then in a solo the next week, which is actually a good strategy for someone to be able to, it kind of builds your own credibility because you have that episode where you're bringing your own things, but then you have a guest on there. And so you're kind of like, it's kind of a way to kind of reinforce what you're teaching with kind of case study in a way. And then it also, as you were able to do, kind of use that as content then to build a future book or just future content and things like that. And so that could be a good strategy. So, hey, you have an author, they write one book, they have a podcast, they're establishing their own brand, but then they bring on some guests that can be able to help like reinforce and also kind of set up, okay, what's the next book that would logically come from this? And we can help use the podcast to build that.
Strategy. I am 100% a fan of anything that's forward thinking and also helping you think about how to repurpose the content you're creating in whatever format you have into multiple other formats, because just because you wrote it down once doesn't mean people saw it. You could post it again, long form, short form, audio form, video form, right? Like you could just keep reposting this content and mix and matching it. Short ebooks, white papers, downloads, opt-ins, etc. So, thinking about how you're going to use all of this. Actually, this is a question I wanted to ask you about your specific services, because I mean, I feel like I'm tapping into such a tiny part of the vastness of what you offer, and I don't like hang out your website. So share with us kind of most people coming to you, where are they in the process of having a podcast, and what's the range of services you're able to provide them?
So the primary thing that I do with people, and part of it is probably because that's where my strength is, and the other thing is maybe they have other team members that take care of other parts, but the main thing I deal with is the audio editing. And so they come to me. There's actually kind of a split. Some people have already started their podcast and they just need a new editor for one reason or another. And so they're just looking for, okay, who can be my next one? And then there is those other people where it's like, hey, I have this idea. I want to start this podcast. And usually they've already kind of gone through some stuff to like kind of vet it and kind of narrowed down a little bit more what they're going to do and things like that. And they're just trying to find someone that can help them be able to take that step. And so, so when we work with people, there's the audio editing that is the primary thing that we do, but then we also do like we help write show notes, and show notes so the definitions can get a little muddled sometimes. So there's show notes that can be there's like what you would put in with the podcast editor, like when you upload it to Libsyn or Captivate or whatever it is, there's that little space there where you put the show notes there. There could be the show notes that's actually like on your blog post. There could be like just a short just a description or a summary, if you will. So it's not like a full-blown type thing. So definitions can be a little more relative with some of that. And so usually when I try to separate, I think of show notes as probably something that's like 1 or 2 paragraph introduction, a couple bullet points, and then a call to action at the end. That's typically what I've seen as far as like what I end up doing with my clients after talking with them, what they're looking for. But then there's also some where it's like, hey, I want a full-blown blog post, so I don't want just the bullet points. Let's go ahead and expand those bullet points. So we have the introduction things. Then instead of just bullet points, we have like 5 other paragraphs, kind of creating like a full blog post in that case. So that would be something a little bit different. But then, so we have the show notes, but then I also, now that I have more of a team, we can do some more things with graphics. So like helping people with either their show level artwork or with an episodic artwork as well. So we've done some of those things. We do some different things as far as excuse me. Obviously I've done some things where I've actually recorded with people, some of that kind of producer thing that you mentioned before, where like you're actually there with them. I've done that a few times. And so that's more of where it's like, just kind of help kind of watch things. Okay, just make sure technically things are going the way they're supposed to. Hey, this person's microphone cut out or whatever. There's actually been a couple times too, where it's like, hey, right in the middle of the episode, it's like, hey, maybe we can like redirect this direction. So I've done that a couple times. So kind of like coaching on the spot, if you will, a little bit of that. And then I've even so we've also, obviously, we help people launch their podcast, so they're starting out from scratch, and so kind of going through, talking through, okay, why do you want to start your podcast? Because that's the most important part when it comes to it, is why you want to start it. Who is your audience? Who are you trying to talk to? And try to narrow that down. And so all these things are like in authors, it's like you do that. Hopefully you do that with your book. And you go through that whole process. It's like we're doing the same thing, but now we're doing it for the podcast, which there might be a lot of overlap with how that goes as far as like the behind the scenes, but it's a little bit different with podcasting, because people that read and people that listen are sometimes different people. And so there's sometimes a little bit a slight difference in some of those things. And then I do have some options for being able to do some coaching, either like a one-off coaching or kind of like a ongoing kind of coaching thing. Like, hey, so we're like, usually that's like with someone where I'm like doing their editing and work with them. And so we're doing stuff, and then every month or quarter or something like that, it's like, all right, here, let's see where we are. Do we need to make any changes? Do we need to modify this or that, and things like that? So
Wow, it's a real range. I mean, this is like great because, again, I'm like, I managed to build out a little bit of a team to help me with a lot of this. We've streamlined it, but like you said, people come with different needs. I can't even count the number of people I have referred to you. I know some of them ended up working with you, the smart ones. But sometimes it's like I get a panic message. Oh my God, Robbie, like my editor's gone. I don't know, they're not responding. What do I do? I'm like, oh, just talk to my guy. Or like or it could be someone who's like, I'm planning to start a show. I need some suggestions, and I always throw your name in, right? So it's like it's been all over the place as far as like why I would suggest it. And I always say I've been working with him for almost a decade, and we've talked like not even 5 times, and it's just smooth. Like, like this is what you need to know. They need to know that like he will figure it out and he will make you look good and sound good, and that's ultimately his job. And you just need to like have a system in place. One of the things we do that has really saved us a lot of time is on the intake form that I have for the booking. There's a question about what their intro is. So we asked them to write a third person intro that's X number of characters, right? Like not very long. And we do that because I want to know what's important to them. Like, what do they want us to prioritize as far as part of that introduction? But we don't ever use their introduction as is. Instead, my assistant will start a Google Doc, and she'll go to all of their social links, their website, and if they have a book, their author page on Amazon, and copy their bio or the About Us section from all of those places. And then we have a little format because I don't know why we did this, but we reveal the name of the guest at the very end of the paragraph. So it always starts with the same sort of today's guest is, and then we describe them, and we end with any kind of accolades they've received, and then we welcome them to the show. I have had so many compliments from guests who are like, "Whoa, can I get a copy of that?" And it's like, "Yeah, I mean, it's you." And they're like amazed. They think we've done deep research, and one of the best places to get deep research is their Amazon author profile, because they don't think to update it. Their book came out 9 years ago, and whatever they thought was important 9 years ago is not something they're talking about as much today. But we have a long enough intro that we can include a line about that. And they're like, wow, you knew about that too? It's amazing, the things they tell me after the show ends. But all I have to do is read through what they've collected. And that gives me a real sense of like what they want the world to know about. And I often find inconsistencies. So I actually recommend everyone does this once a year, because if you say something like, for the last 9 years, that's going to get outdated really fast.
Right.
Like a year later, it's going to be out of date. So I very much recommend saying since whatever year, like pick a year, and then, then all the things, like people have these numbers that fluctuate, like for me, I have this issue because I always talk about how many reviews I've gotten on my books. Well, that number is changing now because I have another book.
Right.
So I have to go around and find that number. So those inconsistencies are something I notice. But it's like it gives me just enough information to know like what's important to them. but then you have to trust your skills as an interviewer. So streamlining, I mean, this is some of the coaching that I do with my clients, is figuring out, like, do you have the capacity to take this on? Because it's going to be upfront a lot of work, but then you can streamline it into some sort of more manageable system if you have the right team members in place. But never run something that you don't know how to do any of it. Like, you should know how to write your own show notes if it came to, like, you having to. Like, you should have some basic understanding what goes into that, even if you're guiding someone else to do it. I'd love, as we're like shifting gears here, we're going to wrap up in a minute, but I want to just actually get a sense from you, Joshua, any kind of success stories you have from clients that you've worked with. Remove me from the equation. I'm going to count me. The fact that I'm still doing this, I started, recording with this fancy mic 10 years ago, and here I am. It's actually 10 years ago this month that I started working on the podcast. Started recording in September 10 years ago, which is just wild. I don't know how that time went by. But any success stories that come to mind, the clients you've worked with?
So there is one client that I've worked with actually longer, or I started working with him before I started working with you. And that is Scott Barlow. He has Happened to Your Career. And so I actually helped him. I was actually helping him with his podcast before he hired me to help with his podcast, like a year and a half before. And so I remember I was at my day job or my night job, and I was on my break walking around outside on the phone with him, talking through some of the different things for that 30 minutes. And so I was with him, and at the same time he was like just starting his company of like career coaching. And so he was trying to build his get started with the podcast that would help supplement and go with the business. And so we did that. And then fast forward, he went about a year, kind of took a little bit of a break, started to come back again. And there was a couple times in there that we did have some conversations and about some of the things with this podcast. And then I finally reached out. We kind of stayed in touch. And so became online friends, and actually took a number of years. I think 2020 was the first time, or 2019. So somewhere in there, we actually met for the first time after a number of years. And so we met at Podcast Movement. But anyway, so his podcast started to grow. And so he got restarted with the podcast after he took a little break. And I just happened to reach out to him like, hey, I'm getting started with podcast editing. And so when we had that initial conversation, I was not doing podcast editing at that time. I had just started a podcast. And so it's like, hey, here's my advice as someone that just recently started one also. And so I was like, hey, I'm getting started in podcast editing. Do you have a need to have a podcast editor? And he's like, actually, I was just thinking about hiring one. And so we had a conversation, and he hired me. And so I started doing his podcast again, right there, the beginning, the middle of 2015. And I was doing the editing of his podcast for a number of years. And it eventually grew to where I would start to do some of his website updating. I wasn't doing like deep stuff, but I would kind of update some of his stuff on his website here and there. And then in 2019, I took a leap and left my full-time job. And then I had a conversation with him somewhere around the same time. I'm like, hey, I just made this leap. I didn't really have a plan, so it wasn't real smart. But anyways, I didn't really have a plan. I'm like, hey, and he's like, hey, I'm actually needing some additional help. We can do some more content management, and threw in a little bit of marketing. And I was wearing a bunch of hats I never should have worn. But anyway, so try to do that. But anyway, so in the process, he went from single and double digits. And when I started really working with him, he was getting about 400-ish, 400 downloads an episode, and eventually grew up. We were getting thousands. And so eventually grew his business, and he was getting a lot more. And then just things in business, my personal life and things like that, we ended up having to part ways a little bit, because his business was starting to grow a different direction. He was needing something a little bit different. I had to go back to my full-time job just because COVID hit, and I wasn't able to pivot very well with my business. And so I had to scale back my podcast business. while I went back to a full-time job, but he needed someone full-time. So anyway, so we ended up having to part. And so,
Yeah,
but he's been able to continue to grow
it's amazing.
as a result of his podcast, really being able to do that in the process. He wrote 2 different books, turned them into audiobooks, and he was able to like do a lot of different things to really grow.
So say his name and the show name again.
Scott Barlow, or Scott Anthony Barlow, and the show is Happen to Your Career.
We'll have to definitely put all those links in the show notes, which will be at bizbookpubhub.com. I mean, I think this is one of those moments where you get started down a path you don't know where it's going to lead. I mean, for me, it went from a podcast to a book to piloting a coaching program to writing for Harvard Business Review to doing a TEDx. That was sort of the 5-year trajectory. And the TEDx talk came out in January of 2020, and I was poised to be an overnight success 10 years in the making. So I'd been speaking about networking for about 11 years at that time. And, COVID happened, right? So a month later, no one needed to know how to network at events. We were all at home. And I managed to reinvent myself, where I became the Zoom guy and ultimately wrote 2 books during the pandemic. That was not the plan. I didn't know. I don't even know how I did that. Someone introduced me actually, like in 23, and said, and here's Robbie, who like wrote 2 books and during the pandemic. And then I was about to get on stage, right, virtually. I was like, what? I did what? I hadn't thought of it that way. And here I finally wrote a book about how I do all these launches, and so my world has shifted so much. I want to just thank you, because Biz Book Pub Hub is. I love that we do this show. I love that the authors who are participating in our Kindle flash sales get an opportunity to be on author panels. We have experts like you and I who are part of the Biz Book Pub Hub curated directory, supporting entrepreneurs through writing, editing, publishing, and marketing their books in various ways, including podcasts. I love that I get to do interviews with them, and we also bring some authors in for one-on-one interviews. And we had so much content. Clearly, right from the start, we were like, it has to be twice a week, and it's just that's a real investment in money and time. And I asked you, like, do you have the capacity to take this on? You're like, yeah, let's do this. And I was like, wow, and here we are. I mean, this is episode 472 that's going to be airing, and that is so ridiculous. Like, I don't even know. I remember when we hit like 300, I was like, hey, we're at 300. Did you expect this to happen? And you were like, yeah, actually. I did. I emailed you. I was like, isn't this amazing? And you're like, yeah, but it's you. I saw this was going this way. So
Yes.
what would you add to that? I mean, it's like getting involved with authors, the collaboration, being part of the hub. Like, what enticed you to say yes when I was like, I'm doing this thing? Why do you think it's a good idea for us to be getting together in these ways?
So it kind of goes back to what I said near the beginning of this conversation, where I got excited working with authors, being able to help get their message out, and the podcast being a way to be able to amplify that message, not just as marketing or promotion, but being able to, like, hey, here's this concept from my book, and let's go deeper, let's go wider, let's get these other conversations that are about this. And I love being able to do that. And so I've done a couple book clubs where it's like, hey, we take a chapter and we're like really digging in to those chapters and applying it. And it's like, okay, how can we do this? And so it's like that. And so that was like back in 2019, 2020, when I started doing some of those things with Happen to Your Career. We're doing some of those things as a team. And it's like, I really like this. And so that's kind of like where that pivot kind of started to make in my head. It's like, I really would like to work more with authors or people that want to become authors and be able to utilize podcasting as a support for that. And so I really would love to be able to do that. And so be able to help establish and be able to do that, because an author has a message already, as opposed to an entrepreneur that has an idea, and maybe they have a message too, but it's like they're trying to take an idea and create messages from that idea. The author already has a message, and just being able to build from there. It just, I don't know, it's just something exciting to me.
I'm glad to have you there. We have our monthly events and all that, so we hope to see you at all those. Speaking of which, how can people find you and follow your work?
So you can go to podcastguymedia.com, or you can also go to joshuawrivers.com, and both of those basically take you to the same place. And so it'd be a good way to be able to see all the different things that I offer as far as podcasting.
Fantastic. We're going to put all the links in the show notes at bizbookpubhub.com, also to your LinkedIn and to your Biz Book Pub Hub Premier Partner profile page that we set up. That's a mouthful. So people can learn all about you and get all your contact info there as well. In fact, if you go to bizbookpubhub.com, you're going to see show notes for all the episodes. We have new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday. And as I mentioned, it's a mix of one-on-one interviews and author panels. Just so much valuable, wonderful, helpful information. I love how authors are all supporting each other, as well as these experts that are supporting the authors. We also will invite you on the bizbookpubhub.com to our monthly free virtual networking events. And there are 3 Kindle flash sales a year where we collaborate and cross-market and cross-promote. And there's just so much. There's even more there. I can't even name all the things. Go head over there to bizbookpubhub.com. And Joshua, thank you again so much for this conversation. Really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.